What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the Berry Blessed podcast. My name is Derek.
My name is Kayla,
and we are the
Berries.
Berries. Today on the channel, we are going to be talking about navigating through difficult conversations. This is a topic that our analytics pulled up for us. So when we were kind of deciding what to talk about today, this one stood out of the 4 or 5 options that it gave us. And I think that's because I'm about to go into a situation where I'm going to have a conversation that is rather difficult, but it doesn't have to just be work related. It doesn't have to just be something that's going on, in a professional standpoint, but it can be something that is going on in your personal life. It's something that could be possibly going on between a husband and a wife, maybe a mother and a father, something going on, with your kids. There's all kinds of difficult conversations that are to be had, and they tend to arise more than not, unfortunately. Now, the great thing about our relationship is we haven't ran into a ton of them, but when we do run into them, I feel like it's something that we kind of nip in the butt right away. And that's kind of how you have to handle those types of conversations.
Yeah, you can't let stuff linger, because I feel like, at least for me, I feel like when stuff lingers about maybe a serious conversation or something that needs to be talked out can just kind of spiral into something even bigger, especially when it's something serious. It could be anything, just depending on your marriage and what you're going through. It's definitely something that we do in our marriage. Is if something's going on, we sit down, we talk. 9 times out of 10, we can't sit down and talk because we're in a different state. But we talk it out on the phone, and then probably most likely reconvene when we're in the same state. But we definitely take care of it right away. We sit down. We might not like it. The other person might not like. We both not it, and it might be also a situation you both don't want to talk about it. You want to kind of just sweep it under the rug and keep going on with your day. Unfortunately, it's not healthy to do that, because it just turns into something that could be 10 times worse for not only yourself, but for your partner, your spouse, your marriage. And it can also affect other people around you, like your kids, your family, your mood, your mental health. It can stress you out and make you feel some type of way towards other people, your workplace too. That's another thing too. If you're angry about something at home and it's just kind of just bothering you and it's underneath your skin, and it's just like, oh, like I don't want to go home and have this conversation.
It tends to fester when you don't discuss it. And when it festers, then all of a sudden, it sometimes a small problem that's still difficult to talk about becomes an even bigger issue, because time isn't always on your side with these types of things. So let's say, it's something really small that if you would have just brought up and just had the difficult conversation, it might not have been a big deal at the time, but because you let it linger on and let it fester and time has passed, then the other person comes at you like, why didn't you bring this up a long time ago? So yes, difficult conversations are difficult for a reason, but they're necessary conversations too. And I think here's the thing. So when we get into how do you have a difficult conversation? What is it that you actually have to do? What should be your first step? And it's almost like ripping that Band-Aid off, right? You should just do it. So being very concise, being very forthcoming, being very blunt and very honest. And sometimes it's even helpful to just tell the person, hey, listen, we're going to have a difficult conversation here. Prepping them so that they know that it's going to be difficult. And then go ahead and say the what, tell them why, and then tell them what you want the solution to be. It's hard to, say without using an example, but essentially the what's the issue? The why is it an issue? And then what's the desired outcome? And then having that conversation on how do you get to that desired outcome, or how do you compromise?
Yeah, exactly. Especially finding the solution to the problem. If that person needs help, if that person needs counseling, whatever the case may be, having that conversation as either a couple or as an individual. And sometimes we have to have those uncomfortable conversations with ourselves. And you're not doing the right thing, or you're consistently doing the same thing and getting the same outcome in regards to certain things within your life. If it's a job, if it's just your lifestyle, having that conversation, I feel like is, you got to do it yourself at the end of the day too. But if you're talking to somebody else, like your spouse or whoever, kind of like prepping yourself, I feel like you also need to prep yourself mentally, your emotions, not let your emotions determine the outcome of the conversation, because sometimes emotions can get infested in that conversation, and then it's just nothing happens, no outcome happens, because there's yelling, there's crying, and it's just nonstop. Nobody's listening. That's another thing too, of being able to, like, okay, yes, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm furious, but I also need to hear this other person's side of how they're feeling. If they're angry, if they're upset, and also listening is a big part of a difficult conversation, because some people can say, and hey, this is how I'm feeling, and spill everything out. But when it comes to somebody telling them the truth, they don't want to hear it.
Yeah, you brought up a good point in saying that when you're prepping for the conversation, if you're the one that's going to be engaging and the one that is going to be presenting the conversation, starting the conversation, prepping yourself so that you're not getting overly emotional, prepping yourself so that you've got your talking points in order. That's a great point. But also, if you're the one that's on the receiving end of the difficult conversation, practice active listening. And active listening is when you're hearing, okay, you're not just hearing, you're also computing what your response is going to be, but you're waiting until you've gotten all the facts. You're listening to all the facts. You're waiting till you have all the facts. You're getting your emotions in check, and then you're responding. So active listening is a huge part of having those difficult conversations. Again, especially if you're on the receiving end, if you're not the one that initiated the conversation and you're receiving it. And it's sometimes these conversations can be shocking, but not allowing the shock and the emotion to overtake you. Take all of that into account, but listen to what that person is telling you and then respond afterwards. Mastering your own emotions, having that type of self-awareness and emotional intelligence is extremely hard to do. It's very hard. But that just comes from knowing yourself, knowing what your buttons are, and when they're pushed, how do you not internalize? You never want to internalize, you never want to push things down, but how do you put that, when that button gets pushed, how do you put that in check temporarily? Because again, you're going to have to deal with that emotion. How do you put that in check for just a moment, actively listen, and then respond in a way that's going to be appropriate and not so overly emotional?
Right. Yeah, 100%. Because I know, like, when I get frustrated and I get upset, I just kind of, it's just like, it's almost, I don't want to say red, but kind of like seeing red in a way. But also, like, active listening, not interrupting. I feel like a lot of people will interrupt conversations when you're in the middle of it too, because they're so emotionally upset at this person and just full of anger. Also, I think too, it's also the, like, if you're having, like, for instance, like a family member, knowing boundaries, maybe setting up boundaries before you starting a conversation, because you know how sometimes family can push those boundaries, and they know, especially like a sibling's known you for as long as you know yourself, and they know how to push your boundaries. They know what to say to be like, okay, I don't like how my sister or my brother's saying this, so I'm going to say something because I know it's going to make them mad. It's going to make them upset. But maybe also setting boundaries, before a conversation, like, okay, we're not going to degrade one another. We're not going to talk negatively. We're not going to curse. We're not going to, having those boundaries is also another thing too. And I feel like we've always had those boundaries as a couple, not even a married couple, but having those boundaries of being respectful, like also too, like with your family, being respectful to one another.
Yeah, and sometimes these difficult conversations come with revelations. If somebody's like admitting something or like explosive details, and when you have something that's just blindsiding for a person, like an example of this, we just came off of this last week when we talked about infidelity. Like if someone was going to admit to their significant other that person was unfaithful, that's shocking. That's explosive. That's something that a lot of times is out of left field. So it's really hard to control your emotions. So knowing when to put a pin in it, and not just saying just end the conversation, but again, if you're just overly emotional or the other person is overly emotional, know when to put a pin in it, walk away, cool down, and then come back to the table when you're cool and resume the conversation. I also like what you said about the boundaries piece, because one thing that I've always said, really over the last couple of years, I've said it more and more, is that I just don't believe that we debate at all anymore in this country specifically. I can't really talk about the rest of the world just because I haven't spent time, significant amount of time, overseas and whatnot. But specifically here in this country, we don't debate anymore. It's all about bashing one another. So if we have a conversation, that we're supposed to be having about debate, about policy, especially when you talk about our politics, you notice that one person will talk about their politics and then the other person might bring their politics into it. But the second that one person doesn't have a response, they begin to cut down the other person in something that's completely and totally non-related to the topic. I feel like in difficult conversations, this happens a lot too, because you've said something that now has hurt me, or you've said something that has offended me. So now I have to come back at you with something that you've done in the past, even though it's completely and totally not related to this conversation that we're having. So I think that's the other part. When you set those boundaries saying, hey, we're not going to talk about derogatory things, we're not going to bring up the past, we are going to keep this conversation on topic. And if those past things do start coming up, if we do start talking to one another derogatory, we're going to shut the conversation down. We're going to put a pin in it. And when we can come back together and talk this out without those things, we can resume the conversation.
I like how you said it, put a pin in it, and how like people do bash one another, because especially like our conversation we had last time about infidelity, if that significant other's telling you, hey, yes, I did cheat on you, and you're going into detail, and that person's not ready to hear that detail, but you keep going because you just want it off your chest and just want it out. Sometimes it's not the right time to put all that like detailed. Some people like to be very detailed of like, I understand you're trying to say, hey, I want you to know what I did detail by detail so that some people are like that. But like you said, I feel like that's a good example of having a conversation, of putting a pin, like, hey, yes, I did do this, but stopping it there and not going into detail until later if that other person wants to know what happened. Because some people want to know what exactly happened, wants to know the truth and the full truth and nothing but the truth. And also setting limits as well as boundaries of, okay, we're not going to go and feel detail about this because, some people can't take it like right away, maybe later down the line. So having those limits of also wanting known to cut off that conversation of like, hey, this is a good stopping point. Let's reconvene. Let's talk about this later or talk about it another day.
Know your audience, if it is your significant other or, family member, know your person, right. Know who you're talking to, be able to pick up on cues, watch their body language, watch their emotion, Watch the way that they're responding, quick, subtle jabs that they're giving back to you, or the rolling of the eyes, or really big hand gestures, or, overly emotional tears and hurt. Might want to slow down on the details and really just kind of get more so to your point. Do your point, right? What's your revelation? Tell what that is. Explain why, and then come to that end game. Hey, this is what I would like to happen, but understand that you're not always going to get your way. What you want to come out of the end of that is not always the way that it's going to end. So you have to let that other person come in. That's why it's called a conversation. If it's you just talking at someone, it wouldn't be a conversation. So it's a conversation because it's going to be dialogue between two or more people. So it's having that respect, having that self-awareness, and having the awareness of what the other person is feeling, and having that empathy for that other person in order for them to be able to get through that conversation as well.
No, that's 100% because, yeah, some people can just I know somebody in my family that's like that. So just kind of say everything, and it's like, okay, this is not the time and place to. And then, some people have those personalities, which is fine. That's just how they cope. They get that nervous tick and they'll laugh or they giggle, or they can't help it. And like you said, you got to know who you're talking to. Know, like, okay, they're uncomfortable. Some people shut down too during a conversation. You're trying to have this conversation, they completely shut down, won't say a word. Then that's when okay, we need to talk about this later and have this conversation a little later, and not try to poke the bear or try to pry answers out of somebody either. That's not really the healthiest thing. Just have them basically go through those emotions, but also thinking about, like, okay, like, just let them process on their own time and come back to that conversation too.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it. We will be back on next week as I travel back out to Wisconsin. Kayla's here in Arizona. So yeah, I think we'll have to just look again on our recommended. And, obviously, if there's ever anything that you all want us to talk about, just let us know in the comment section.
Please do. They love to hear comments.
We are more than happy then to discuss it. But until then, my name's Derek.
My name is Kayla.
And we are the Berries. God bless.
Bye, guys.